Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Industry, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to examine what's occurring in the fleet industry for the week of May 16th, 2022. And for this week's episode, I'd like to examine the dynamics that are generating increased speculation about the possibility of an economic downturn in both the US and European economies. And what's triggering this speculation among a variety of economists and financial analysts is the emergence of widespread inflation, which in the US grew 8.3% in the month of April 2022. And then adding to this, what followed was an investor announcement by Deutsche Bank on April 27th saying it expects a recession in late 2023 to early 2024. And Deutsche Bank is a very significant financial institution. In fact, it's the 21st largest bank in the world, and it has tremendous fiduciary responsibilities. So this announcement caught the attention of a lot of people. But to date, Deutsche Bank is the only bank that made this prediction. So a recession is not something that is thought to be inevitable. But it does raise the following question, which I want to address in this week's episode. If an economic downturn does occur, and this is still a big unknown, how might it impact the fleet industry? And to frame this discussion, I'd like to put things in perspective because sometimes we, and me included, tend to have an exaggerated importance of fleet. Well, to all of us, fleet is the center of the known universe, and of course, fleet does play an important role in the nation's economy. Nonetheless, fleet is still a relatively small component of the overall $23 trillion US macroeconomy. And as a consequence, more times than not, fleet is actually a victim of larger economic forces over which it has no control. And one example that we're witnessing firsthand today is the skyrocketing price of gasoline and diesel. And while there's a lot of hand-wringing over this, the reality is there is nothing that fleet managers can do to prevent this cost increase. And since we can't control this cost, the best we can do is to mitigate the impact of these cost increases. So for instance, we can source more fuel efficient vehicles, we can attempt to change employee driving behaviors, or we can introduce policies to minimize unnecessary idling. But in the final analysis, none of these actions by themselves will change the price of a gallon of gasoline or diesel. Our only recourse is to mitigate the impact of higher fuel prices by simply burning less fuel. And another example of fleet industry's limited control over external forces is as follows. Today, the vehicle availability is the number one challenge facing all fleet managers. But as we all know and know all too well, there's really nothing we can do about it. At best, we can order early or we can attempt to leverage OEM relationships, but the reality is there is not much we can do. And in many ways, fleet does not have control over its own destiny. And the job of fleet managers is to mitigate the impact of these external forces. And by saying this, it's not to diminish these efforts because mitigation by itself is worth its weight in gold to corporations because all of these savings go straight to the bottom line. But we need to recognize our limitations. For instance, what can we do about the shortage of spare parts? Well, actually, nothing. What can we do about the decrease in OEM fleet incentives? Well, other than switching OEMs, not much. With this as background and context, the latest significant challenge facing fleet managers today is the reemergence of inflation in the economy, which is today at the highest rate in the past 40 years. And what is potentially significant about this is that none of us really have any experience in operating a fleet in a high inflation environment. And those who have, are long since retired. Today, we are witnessing the impact of higher inflation on the price of commodities, which are used to manufacture many fleet products, such as replacement tires, upfit accessories, catalytic converters, and so on. The price of aluminum, copper, rare earth minerals, to name a few, they're all trending upwards. And the proven way to control inflation is to dampen consumer demand. And the US Federal Reserve seeks to accomplish this by gradually increasing interest rates over specific intervals of time. And the key word here is gradually, because if it raises interest rates too fast, it can trigger an economic downturn. And there's good reason for this concern. If you look at economic history, almost all successful government programs to control inflation invariably have resulted in a recession. So all of them, almost all of them. The question is whether it'll be a mild recession or a severe recession, or to use their vernacular, whether it's going to be a soft landing or a hard landing. So, what is the track record of the US Federal Reserve? Well, since 1961, the US Federal Reserve has launched a series of interest rate increases to rein in inflation, and it's done so on 9 separate occasions. Well, 8 out of those 9 separate occasions, a recession has resulted. So, it's not really a good track record. The only true soft landing following a significant rate hike occurred back in 1994, according to a report that I located from the investment banker Piper Sandler. So there is historical precedent to support the concern about a potential of a recession following a series of interest rate hikes. So this brings me to the title of this week's episode. What is the potential impact of a recession on the fleet market? Well, first of all, we all know the fleet market buys a consistent volume of vehicles year after year, regardless of whether the economy is good or bad. And when you exclude rental sales, which is where you have the volatility, and solely examine commercial fleet sales over the decades, there's not been a lot of variability in total sales. And in fact, it's been very consistent and a steady volume of vehicle acquisitions model year after model year. And while many businesses that operate fleets may indeed experience a downturn in revenues during a recession, past experience has shown that funding for replacement fleet vehicles will be available, as a majority of these companies view fleet vehicles as a necessary business tool. They need the fleet vehicles to generate revenue themselves. But this is not the case with retail buyers. These retail buyers in economically lean times will tend to defer or to postpone new vehicle purchases, or they'll migrate to the used vehicle market if they really need to acquire a new vehicle. Higher interest rates generally translate into higher auto loans, and this dampens the retail demand for new automobiles. And one positive from this is that it's going to result in greater product availability for fleets as retail demand slackens and there's less competition for these high demand vehicles. As OEM competition for fleet business increases during these recessionary times, I guarantee you there'll be pressure from fleet managers for OEMs to reinstitute stronger incentive programs in order to earn their business and for the OEMs to offset their lower retail sales. And in addition to a reduction in buyer demand triggered by these recessionary pressures, it's going to help to bring equilibrium between end user demand and production volumes. It's always been my contention that a recession is the fastest way to eliminate today's sourcing constraints, and it will serve in the end to function as a reset moving forward to have buyer demand and product availability in more equilibrium. Also, if you view today's and yesterday's new vehicles as tomorrow's used vehicles, the sourcing constraints in the 2021 and 2022 model years will result in a tighter used vehicle inventories that are going to exert upward pressure on used vehicle prices in those future years. A recessionary environment tends to favor the used vehicle market because marginal new vehicle buyers tend to migrate back to the used vehicle market when times get lean. Our experience in past recessions, it supports this supposition. And, for example, we experienced strong used vehicle markets in the 2007-2009 recession, and likewise in the 2001 recession. Fleet has no control over whether or not there's going to be a downturn in the economy. I mean, fleet exists in a diversified and complex US macroeconomy where the financial pain of one economic segment might actually be to the financial benefit of another economic segment. And that's the case here. So with this as a final observation, I'd like to conclude my State of the Fleet Industry presentation for the week of May 16th, 2022.